Well,
Back.
for those of you, we are back. For those of you just joining us, another exciting conversation to kind of try to provide some context to some of the news that we've been hearing about the war in Iran and adjacent events. So the last time that we met and talked about this, there was there were a lot of things going on. There was a lot that we didn't know. There was a lot still to play out. Uh, Ayatollah Khamenei had just been killed. I don't even think his son had been named as a successor yet.
No, for sure.
And the opening volley of the uh, beginning of hostilities with Iran had seen tremendous success for the United States and Israel. Now, I hesitate to say it's the start of the war. I would say that the war began 47 years ago
I would
with
agree.
the Islamic Revolution, yep, sweeping into power. I'd say that that's when the war really started. It was just on February 28th that we acknowledged we were at war and we started acting like it. But now, about 7 weeks later, since the beginning of this round of hostilities, there's some conflicting information in the news. Some people are saying, "Oh, we won." Others are saying, "No, we didn't win." Both Iran and the United States are claiming victory, and there are points to be made on each side, I would say. So what we're going to do
Is the
tonight
Pope
is
right?
have a
Is the president right?
conversation. Is the Pope right or the president right? We're Jewish, so
I mean,
we answer to a higher
I just have to say, would 6 weeks ago, if someone had said that the Pope and the president were going to be going at it in the news, that might have even been something like a bridge too far. Like we would at
authority.
least said, well, the Pope's not going to do that. The Pope's not going to take the bait. Uh,
Oh, hold my beer.
yeah, hold my beer. Ay, ay, ay.
Here we are. It's a strange time to be alive, Rabbi.
It is. It is a strange time. And it is a strange time in this, this issue of who wins, who won, right? Um, I don't know if it's always been clear. Maybe, there's in lots of other battles and wars, but from what I understand, there is a history, certainly, after World War II, where there was, clearly Japan lost and they admitted loss, right? Clearly Germany lost because all of the top command were dead, and Germany was being forced to accept and was accepting the reparations that it was going to have to, engage in. So we do have a history about that, but I'm not sure. I mean, you know better than I do, George. Since World War II, we've had the Korean conflict, we had the Vietnam War, right? We've had so many other battles and incursions, but there hasn't been, at least it seems to me like there hasn't been a clarity of win-loss. And I think that's one of the issues that I think is playing itself out for people and making things even more complicated than they already are, right?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think that if you look at the entire history of warfare, indecisive results are maybe more normal than we would like to admit. The decisive results really do stick with us. So, like the American Revolutionary War, um, the Civil War, these are very obvious cases of quite decisive results. But War of 1812,
Mhm.
eh, we survived as a country, but what did we gain out of that war other than our own survival?
Mhm.
Um, Other examples that you mentioned, Korea, Vietnam, even Desert Storm. Yes, we liberated Kuwait. Yes, we bailed out our partner, the Saudis. But what else resulted from that? Like Saddam did not have to leave Baghdad and come to capitulate in front of American generals. We left his army, and in particular the cream of his army, mostly intact. and free to crack down on internal dissidents within that country that otherwise might have overthrown him and solved that problem for us. So when we look at the state of play in Iran right now, so far it looks like a pretty indecisive result. We really did just
Let me interrupt you
decimate.
just a second. Let me interrupt
Yeah,
you just because I had this idea, and it's a little, I don't know, campy. Okay, but I grew up at
I'm here
camp.
for it. I like
All right,
campy.
and youth group, and and one of the things that we would use to sort of evaluate things, and that back then it'd be evaluate the day, how things went, and you would share your rose, your bud, and your thorn, right?
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
so the rose is, the great blossom of the day, the really great news, the optimistic perspective, the thing that, gives us hope, right? And really gives us some sense of solace, right? The the actually solace because the bud, is that which is yet to blossom. But when we see a bud on a tree on a branch, it's the promise, right? And so it's got all the features that it's going to potentially. So the bud is those things that are in place that have made other things potential, right? And then the thorn, it's pretty easy to understand the thorn. The thorn is the thing that sticks you, the thing that causes
Yeah.
you to bleed, the thing that causes you that hurts, right? And so what I was
So
really,
the rose is like the upside, the bud is like the potential, and the
yeah,
thorn is the downside.
exactly.
Okay.
What I was thinking to help our viewers and help those who are listening, what if we could talk about the last, whatever it is, 6 weeks, um, or 47 years, but 6 weeks, in the context, with these content, with these ideas in mind. What are the things that really we should take great celebration even from, great solace from? What are the things that are lying in wait that are really positive potential? And then what are the things that are really that really hurt, that are really painful, that um, that are causing that are tearing at our not to make push the metaphor too far, but that literally are tearing at the fabric of our society and of our lives. So with that, let's maybe we could have that conversation in that context about the
Okay.
last.
Well, let's lead off with kind of the result of the last 6 weeks. Just starting focusing on Iran. Um, the rose. Well, Iran is a sworn enemy of the United States, and this conflict has left their defense industrial base devastated. Their missile force is a fraction of what it once was. Their navy's on the bottom of the sea for the most part. Uh, their air force doesn't exist anymore. And it is going to take a long, long time to build back all of that combat power. Like a decade at
I would
least.
say that the Council of Economic Advisors in Iran has actually reported to Ghalibaf, is that his name? Right?
Yeah,
Ghalibaf?
Galibaf. Yeah.
Ghalibaf,
Mhm.
that at minimum, they believe they're 12 years away from getting back to where they were.
And that's certainly a good thing. We've taken an enemy of the United States and slapped them back 12 years.
Mhm.
That's a good thing. Now for the thorn.
Mhm.
This ceasefire has left Iran operationally in control of the Strait of Hormuz. That is a pretty strong strategic position. So 8 weeks ago, they didn't have control over the Strait of Hormuz. 8 weeks ago, they weren't charging tolls for ships to sail through the Strait of Hormuz. Now they're doing that, um, even in the face of the U.S. blockade that's preventing ships from leaving Iranian ports or going to Iranian ports.
Because I'm going to
So
ask you
Iran,
two questions about that. Two
go
questions.
for it.
The first is, um, how?
Mm.
How did this happen? Right? I mean, and is it uh, is it a rational expectation that the US should have been ready for this, or could they have stopped it? Because it's my understanding that the only thing that's truly threatening the Strait is Iran says it's willing to mine it to send these speedboats against uh, uh, ships or drones, right? All of which can cause horrible destruction.
Yeah.
But how did it happen? How is it that we're here 8 weeks later and that's like how did that change?
Well, I don't think that it's the case that we just straight up weren't ready for it. I mean, U.S. Central Asia Command, which we call CENTCOM, yeah, they've got plans for Iran. They've got like shelves full of plans for Iran. This particular contingency, I mean, I don't know exactly how much planning they put into this, but I'm sure they must have known that Iran would attempt to close the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
And their answer for that was strong, that destroy the Air Force, destroy the Navy, sensible, right? Well, as you pointed out, Iran doesn't need to just physically block off the Strait of Hormuz. In order to prevent the merchant ships from sailing, all they need to do is threaten them. And in order to do that, they don't need much. They need
Mhm.
to be able to threaten or insinuate that they have put mines in the strait. They need to have some of those Shahed drones that they can fly into the target, which, I mean, the Strait of Hormuz is not very wide. It's 30 miles. Uh, yeah, and you can launch those Shahed drones from almost anywhere. So it would be extremely difficult for us to be able to prevent the launch of any Shahed drones. And try to put yourself in the shoes of one of those merchant captains
Right.
when you're not a soldier. You are not there to put your life on the line for your country. You are there to move somebody else's cargo and make money and protect your ship and crew. With that as your responsibility, uh, if that was my job, you would have to pay me a lot to get me to move through the Strait of Hormuz that if Iran was holding that threat over it. So that's the problem that we have here is this asymmetry that the Iranian Air Force has been destroyed, their Navy's been destroyed, but that doesn't matter because they can threaten just enough to make those merchant ships unwilling to sail and make the insurance companies unwilling to insure them. So I hate to say it, but this has been this is a strong strategic position for Iran, and it's going to be very difficult for us to dislodge them from it.
And what do we think of the Trump administration's decision to blockade the blockade?
I think it's a strong play. I wonder also why we didn't do this one sooner. It
Right.
seems so logical to
Yeah.
most of their revenue comes from oil, and most of their oil revenue comes from tankers. Why didn't we stop all maritime traffic going to and from Iranian ports?
Yeah.
That seems to be something we should have done at the outset of this round of hostilities. Um, but hey, better late than never. I
Okay.
think it's a good idea now, and I'm glad that they're trying it.
Okay. So we got the rose, we got the
Yeah.
bud. I'm
Oh,
sorry,
that was
the
the
rose, we
thorn.
got the
That was the
thorn.
thorn.
So what's the bud?
Well, I
Or
think
both?
expanding the Abraham Accords looks more promising than ever. Iran, in their indiscriminate attacks on pretty much all of their neighbors, has shown that even the Omanis and the Qataris who were trying to appease Iran, even they got attacked by Iran.
Mm.
And so I think that I'm hoping at least that there are other Gulf Arab countries who are looking at their options and seeing like, hey, appeasement to Iran is not a successful strategy in avoiding attacks by Iran. But Israel is still like the strongest military force in the Middle East. Maybe we would benefit from stronger security ties to Israel. Maybe we benefit from intelligence cooperation with Israel and perhaps even recognizing Israel. Um, I
It's
think
funny.
that getting Kuwait in there, this should be a slam dunk. Saudi Arabia, they're probably on the fence, and I'm hoping that we're doing a diplomatic push to bring them over into the Abraham Accords. But other Abraham Accords countries, Morocco, Bahrain, UAE, it looks like that alliance with Israel is stronger than ever.
So I have this theory that that anti-Semitism is and always has been a ploy and not the deepest of hatred that it's presented to be. I think anti-Semitism lasts because it works, because it has a pragmatic, effective result. And look, we can thank 2,000 years of European history for that. I've even made the argument at times, and I do not have any scientific proof that this is true. But I know that there's amazing studies when it comes to the notion of epigenetic trauma, right? This notion that in generations that experience tremendous trauma, that it actually has an impact, a change impact on one's genetic makeup, which can be passed down to the next generation. And I believe that if that's the case, I think epigenetic hatred is, I believe in something called epigenetic hatred, right? That this notion of there's something bad and wrong about the Jews is inherent. It's built in. It just because it's so irrational in so many ways. So I say that because wouldn't it be interesting, if Iran is the catalyst for Qatar and Oman and Saudi Arabia to overcome their anti-Semitism, which has been a central tenet of their country's public policy for 50 years or more, right? Wouldn't it be? And I make this, somebody made this joke, which I just repeat, that, as we're familiar with the story of Israel and then into the early 50s, once Israel was established, all of the Jews of all of the Arab countries were kicked out of their countries. But they weren't killed, right? But they were forced out. And where did these Arab countries tell them to go? They told
Israel.
them to go to the Jewish country, right? And so the joke is that Iraq and Morocco and Tunisia and Syria and Egypt were hardcore Zionists in the 50s,
Weird how that works,
right?
right? Hey,
Right? I mean, they were Zionists. They were Zionists because what does it mean to be a Zionist? It means that that piece of land is the Jewish country. It's the Jewish land. So, it's it's so maddening to watch what's going on in our country and throughout the West. Um, how it is that so many in the West have somehow championed the Iranians, the Iranian
yeah,
leadership, right? How is it that in January, when
yes,
32,000 or so Iranians were killed, there wasn't a peep on the college campuses?
yep, absolutely.
I mean, it's just insane.
It
So
it
anyway,
does not make sense.
right. So okay, so I always want to just review our rose, our thorn in our butt. So the rose is that the rose is maybe is that American power and Israeli power have fundamentally undermined the power, the military power, the economic power of the Iranian leadership. And that
Absolutely.
it does matter that Khomeini was killed, and it does matter that many levels of his leadership have been decimated and taken out. Even though there is still terrible violence coming from the IRGC and most of which we aren't even aware of because the internet is not even running there. So that's our our general uh, um, that's our
Yeah, that's the road. That's the good news. Yeah, yeah.
um, and I think it's meaningful, right? When we think about Iran, if we're limiting our expectations to does this make Israel safer? I don't think there's a way of saying that it doesn't in significant ways. I think it does make Israel safer, maybe more so in the long run than in the short run. Um, I'll have to ask you if you agree with that. But then we have the thorn, which maybe the biggest thorn of all is Iran's stepping in and stepping up their efforts with really the one card they have to play, which is to shut down the traffic in the Strait of Hormuz.
Powerful card though.
It's a very powerful card. And then the bud, the potential is what was the bud?
The bud is the potential expansion of the Abraham Accords
Yes,
that
Abraham.
we have a potential here now that the other Arab countries have seen like, hey, Israel's no threat to the Gulf Arabs. It's really not. In fact, a close partnership of with Israel can benefit all of those countries, whereas Iran has just proved that a close relationship with Iran is no protection from Iran.
Not even from Iran, let alone right.
Yeah, exactly. It's like Oman and Qatar, they both tried to ingratiate themselves to Iran. Both of them got attacked. So
Yeah,
all these
it's almost
Israel
like
gets
a
accused of indiscriminate attacks. Iran is guilty of them.
yeah, it's almost like a mafia. Like the mafia goes and they force a storekeeper to pay them protection money, right? And then they get caught by the police, and then in response they blow up the store,
Pretty
that they were
much.
supposed to be protecting, right? I mean, it's
Pretty much.
right. So you're going to do to me what it is you're threatening that's going to happen to me if I don't pay you, but so I pay you, and then you still do it,
Do anything.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's maddening. Um, so it's you were going to ask if this has made Israel safer in the long run. So I would ask, is it going to make Israel safer in the long run? Is it going to make the United States safer in the long run? And I think both questions are kind of up in the air. And
Mhm.
it gulls me and disturbs me a little bit to have to report that. But here's my thinking on the subject. Is the United States safer in the long run? Well, this event, in particular the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, has challenged the entire framework of maritime trade freedom that the United States has guaranteed since World War II. This is the beginning of a new era, the likes of which like we're both like our combined age would be too young to remember like a an era that we haven't had freedom of navigation over the seas. But the era of freedom of navigation is at an end. You can't unring this bell. And so the United States as a maritime power, well, I don't know what long-term impact this is going to have on us, but probably not good because we depend on overseas trade. Is this
So,
going to
George,
make Israel? Yes,
wait, hang on, before you go on, our viewers, our listeners, they need a 3-minute primer on what you mean by America being the world protector of maritime travel, because most people are not, familiar with the history of piracy and the history of so much that led that. I mean, America's role. I think that a lot of people have forgotten or never knew that that without that power in the world, our world was far less guaranteed, far less secure. Just this notion that we could regularly rely upon the regular delivery of products made in China, without them being plundered, without them
yeah,
being blown up. I mean, these places on these oceans, they're very insecure. I mean, so just share us with us a little bit more about what that means and
sure. So,
how did this bell get rung?
so we, what I say when I say that the United States is a maritime power, I mean just look at us geographically. Western Hemisphere, like we are physically isolated by two enormous oceans from Asia and Europe.
Mhm.
So if we want to have commerce with them, well, the sea that's the way to do it. And that's the way we've historically done it ever since we have been a country. That's what I mean when I say that we are a maritime power. Now, as you say, these big open expanses, they can be quite dangerous, not just from weather events. People make it quite dangerous. The golden age of piracy was kind of late 17th century, early 18th century, and it was finally broken by the power of the Royal Navy, establishing bases in the Caribbean and just saying, no, we're not going to tolerate plundering of our ships. Piracy saw another upsurge at the beginning of the 19th century on the Barbary Coast. So in northern Africa, these were actually Islamist pirates who you could kind of see as the forerunner of the Islamist Somali pirates who are plundering ships in the Indian Ocean. And the European countries all paid protection money to the Barbary pirates. It was the United States under Thomas Jefferson that just said, no, we're not doing this anymore. We're not going to tolerate this threat to free trade. And so they sent in warships and they landed the Marines, and that was one of our country's very first wars. An indecisive one, uh, kind of another example of that. But the fact that one of the first things that we did as a country was fight Barbary Coast pirates shows just how important maritime trade is to us. Now, prior to World War II, it was the British Royal Navy that guaranteed freedom of navigation over the seas. Great Britain, another maritime power, they benefited tremendously from overseas trade. So it was in their interests to secure freedom of navigation for everybody. But after World War II, the Royal Navy was a shadow of its former self, Great Britain crippled by debt. But the United States, we had the largest navy in the world. So we became the guarantor of freedom of navigation of the seas. And even though the Soviet Navy, yes, it was certainly a threat to us. It was certainly our adversary. They never really attempted to challenge us on that score because freedom of navigation and free commerce on the seas was regarded as a common good. It was a just a general good, a net benefit to everybody. Well, so how did the bell get rung?
Yeah.
Well, the Iranians are kind of taking up that old mantle of the Islamist Barbary pirates. They see that geographically they have a tremendous advantage. They have their fist poised over this energy artery of the world. And it's an opportunity for them to extort the world for their own benefit.
And
And if the United States,
the way they and the only way they well, I'm not saying the only way, but one of the ways that theoretically that could be undone is a way that there's probably not the will of the US or any other country, which is to put thousands of soldiers on the ground in Iran. Um, but even still, I mean, it's a 90 million person country. You
it's
know,
tough. I mean, you're right. If I don't see how you fix that problem without regime change. And at
right,
this point, I don't see how you do regime change without a massive ground invasion.
right.
So, which, as you say, 90 million country, physically vast country, and quite rugged. Um, I don't think this is such a good idea. Putting in a massive ground force to try to institute regime change. I
Especially because we have almost no allies who are willing to step in, um, and lend their efforts, their support, which is a whole nother story. Um, that's
so
the
that's
yeah,
how we got to where we are. How was that for a 3 minute primer?
yeah, that was good. That was good. I think you did a good job. Um, but that's the part that gets me down. I'll just share with you from my heart. I find myself I've been a rabbi for 20 going on 27 years. And I thought that I had hit a dark period after October 7th. And I had, but um, I've been feeling even, I'm not going to call it despair, but just for so much tremendous frustration um, with this war because a big part of me I just want Israel to be safe. I want, I don't want I don't want to return to a time. I appreciate that Israel has sort of established this. I just the idea that no longer will they abide, um, forces on their borders that are regular or even beyond their borders that are regularly declaring the death to Israel, especially as they're building up their arms and and Israel's made there's so much progress. There's also so much problems, like we can see with Hezbollah. Um, but it is tremendously um, it tears at my heart when I look at where we're at. When I look at Gaza being the portion of Gaza that's run by Hamas is still very much run by Hamas, and they are operating pretty much at will. Hezbollah has unbelievable amounts of missiles. Um, and as I've shared with you before, I have this very dear friend who lives in Beirut, who regularly talks to me about his situation, and he speaks so hopefully. I mean, he believes, he's been dealing with this since the 1980s, and he has suffered so much, and there's been so many who have killed so many in his family. Um, and he sees this as a potential, like anything that
Okay.
suggests there's a possibility for some sort of rapprochement between Lebanon and Israel. And what are you gonna say?
So this is another good topic to do Rosebud Thorn
Yeah.
on is
Yeah.
the ceasefire is just announced this morning, a
Yes.
ceasefire of 10 days between Israel and Hezbollah. I'm using my words I'm choosing my words very carefully here. Um, so I was in a webinar with Rystad Energy. They provide analytics on energy around the globe, and they were doing a webinar on the Middle East war. And one of the speakers kept on referring to Israel's attack on Lebanon.
Mm,
And I reached out to Rystad to say, this is a factual mistake you're making, and I expect a correction. Israel is not attacking Lebanon. Israel is attacking Hezbollah, which is a foreign sponsored terrorist organization that is occupying southern Lebanon. Israel has actually been very careful to avoid attacks against government targets. They've been carefully avoiding attacks on the legitimate government of Lebanon, and they've been razor focused on destroying Hezbollah and pushing them north of the Litani so that Israeli communities in the northern part of Israel can finally enjoy some peace from these murderous Hezbollah rocket attacks for once. And then came the news of the ceasefire this morning.
mhm.
And I must admit, I was disappointed by this. Okay, and so here's my rosebud thorn.
Okay.
Rose, ah, I am really struggling to find an upside of this one. I really am. The best I can come up with is that a ceasefire gives the Israelis a chance to rest, rearm, reconstitute. Let's get those reservists back to work. Let's maybe mobilize some new reservists so you have fresh troops in there and get the guys who are currently on the front lines back to their families and back to work and get the Israeli economy rolling again. Because I mean, these last 2.5 years of war, it's that's tough economically, and the economy is the engine that every country runs on.
Right.
So that's the best I can come up with for a rose. It's not a great one because yeah, Israel can rest, but Hezbollah can rest too.
Mm,
And militarily, I'll tell you that time always favors the defender.
mm.
Here's the thorn. This was
That
our
wasn't
best
much of a rose,
opportunity.
by the
Oh,
way.
what's that?
There wasn't much of a rose.
No, I'm sorry. It's the best I can do. It's
All right.
I'm really struggling to see an upside to this ceasefire because the thorn is this was the best opportunity that we've seen to destroy Hezbollah, which is an organization that, make no mistake, has a lot of American blood on its hands.
Oh,
The world will be a much better place when Hezbollah has been exterminated, eradicated. And that time has just been postponed. Because make no mistake, a ceasefire is not peace.
it's
It's
just an
a
interruption.
temporary absence of fighting. That's not peace. This is a respite between rounds of fighting. So this idea that we seem to have in American diplomatic circles that, oh, we need to off ramp to a ceasefire and that a frozen conflict will somehow inevitably resolve itself. I don't know why we keep thinking that, especially now that there really was an opportunity for a decisive end to this conflict with Hezbollah destroyed. So now all we've done is postpone another round of fighting. There will be another round of fighting. I guarantee it. Might be even harder than the one we've just seen. So that's the thorn.
Yeah.
The bud, and again, this isn't really much of a bud, but it's something. We've got President Aoun, Joseph Aoun of Lebanon, traveling to Washington, D.C. to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Mhm.
This is, diplomatically speaking, this is an important step. It could lead to Lebanon joining the Abraham Accords and getting real peace between the legitimate government of Lebanon and Israel, which would be a big step forward for Israel and for the region. Think about it, like Israel being at peace with three out of its four neighbors.
Right.
Last one being Syria, and hard to say what direction they're going to go.
Kind of a cool
Yeah.
piece. It's you can't, I wouldn't turn your back, but it's gotten quieter.
Agreed. So that's not nothing, but here's the thing. During this war, Lebanon declared the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon persona non grata and told him he needed to leave the country.
Right.
Iran said, no, 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 stay. And Hezbollah said, no, no, he stays. And guess what? The Iranian ambassador is still sitting in his embassy in Beirut. So, that being the case, if Lebanon doesn't even have control of its own capital
Mhm.
enough to evict an ambassador that it doesn't want to be there, then what value is really any kind of agreement you make with the Lebanese government? When they dragged their feet and stalled for 15 months to disarm Hezbollah, never did it. The army is not strong enough to be able to disarm Hezbollah without like very direct Israeli support.
Right.
And like case in point, like you don't have control of your capital enough to kick out an ambassador that you don't want there. So then what's the value of negotiating with you?
Mhm.
So overall, this ceasefire in Lebanon, I'm disappointed. I really am.
Hmm. All right. So where do we leave? We have a couple more minutes. We want to leave our listeners with some sense of hope. So I'm gonna start by calling upon number one. Um, I'll tell a quick story, and I'm probably going to mess up the joke a little bit, but basically, I heard Rabbi David Wolpe tell this story. The story goes that he had a dream, and he was talking with his grandfather. And he said to his grandfather, right? He said, "Oh my gosh, Grandpa, you'll never believe what's happening. There are there are Jew there oh there are at Harvard, there are Jews who are who are protesting, and against against Israel. I'm not going to get who are attacking Jews because just willy-nilly, and the grandpa says there are Jews at Harvard, you know. And he says, well, yeah, they're attacking because of they're accusing Israel of the Jewish nation of doing these things. And he says, there's an Israel, right? Yeah. And so, okay, I know I totally butchered this joke, but the point is that you know we live in a world that has been a truly uh, unsafe world for the Jews for in and around at least 1948 years. If we, we Jews never had from about, not that much, but from about 70 CE until 1948, we had no sovereign means of protecting the Jewish people writ large. Right? We had moments of safety, we had moments of quiet, but it was, of course, always reliant upon our seeking favor from our hosts, which, as we know, was always short-lived. And so, as Haviv Retagur says, the wholesale slaughter of Jews in the Eastern Hemisphere that was a regular feature of our history ceased in June of 1948. And it fundamentally changed what it means to be a Jew in the world. And so if if we if we broaden our context, and again, it's not the way I want to understand it, but if we live in a world in which Jew hatred is just part and parcel of what it means to be part of the West, then at least we can say that we're facing it with a sovereign protector. That it reminds me of what you were talking about in terms of the American military being a witting and unwitting protector of maritime of maritime law, or enforcer of maritime law, by its existence. Because it's not like America is always patrolling the Atlantic and the Pacific and is always look, it's but the fact that it exists, it sets up a guarantee of this is what's appropriate, this is what is allowable. And Israel, to a certain extent, it's almost like that worldwide maritime power that
Mm.
says to Jews, not just the Jews in Israel, and even, and if there's anybody who's Jewish, who is an anti-Zionist, who happens to be listening to this right now, I'll say to you that yes, they'd even protect you,
Yes.
you know, um, because it's about protecting the Jewish people. So Israel's existence, even though I am not in favor or in support of so much of the policies of the right-wing government in Israel, and I will never support violence happening in the West Bank, and I will never that is uncalled for and in so many different ways, right? But my my sometimes badly behaving Jewish country is still my Jewish country, and its existence does, in a meaningful way, protect me and protect you. The fact that it is a power in the world, not to mention what you point out, the most powerful power in the Middle East. Um, so I guess my overarching bud is um, is also couched in a little bit of uh, cynicism, that if we have to live in a world that still reels from what I would call the disease of anti-Semitism, I would much rather live in the world with Israel as a reminder to the world that we are not going anywhere. So
It's really good. So one question that you posed to me before we started this conversation is, how I still serve the United States of America. How do I reconcile that with knowing some of the bad things that the United States has done? And um, how do we reconcile our conscience as Zionists with realizing the mistakes that Israel has made during the course of its history? Like, how do I square that circle? Well, I would say in for both the United States and in Israel, it's because of our capacity to course correct. That's
yeah.
what it is. I mean, you've recently returned from your tour of the Deep South, where you
Mhm.
explored some very dark chapters in America's history. But we don't do those things anymore, do we? We
Right.
put an end to segregation. We put an end to legal voter suppression that took place in the South. And as far as Israel goes, uh, Israel is a democracy. If you don't like the current government of Israel, it'll change because they'll have a vote the bums out kind of election. They'll elect new leaders. Um, Netanyahu won't always be the prime minister of Israel. Um, for what it's worth, I would like to see the next generation of Israeli leaders rise up and rise to the occasion because, I mean, Netanyahu has been the leader of Israel for the majority of my adult life. I mean, some fresh blood couldn't hurt. Um, but that's the thing, the Israelis, if they don't like the direction their country is going, they can vote and change things, as they have during multiple times in their history.
Bill?
Whereas our adversaries have time and again shown that they cannot. They do not have that capacity of self-reflection, and they definitely don't have the ability to course correct. So the United States and Israel, for all of our flaws, we can fix those flaws. We can, and we do. So I'd say don't lose hope. Don't lose hope in America, and don't lose hope in Israel, because
I'll add
Israel is,
one thing.
yeah,
I'll add
lay it
one.
on.
The institutions of democracy are crucial. When we think about the fact that Viktor Orban was voted out of the presidency, I mean, he was as close to what people would call a Putin or a Khomeini, right? He wasn't, but I mean, like the characterization of him was, and that he would, and it was described that he would never be able to be voted out, and it would be completely, undermined and illegal.
But he's about to oversee a peaceful transition of power to a political opponent.
Exactly. Exactly. So I guess I want to say to the folks who are um, waning in their belief in the goodness of America and Israel, the waning in their belief in the goodness of democratic principles. Um, they do work, especially when people raise their voices and vote and take responsibility for the course of their country. So,
That would be my call to action. Vote. Get
okay.
out there and vote. Inform yourself about the issues, inform yourself about the candidates, and vote well.
All right. Well, that is a great place to end. Thank you, George. As always, our prayer is that cooler heads will prevail.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.